Should all of the weights that you use be equal when you work out? This is a question that we've been receiving a lot over the last couple of weeks. And on this week's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, we are going to answer it directly. We're going to cue our introduction and then dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg and Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset. And the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we are exploring a question that has come up quite a bit frequently with different clients, all who are into strength training, they're lifting weights, but they have this curiosity, they have this question, and maybe you have had it as well. And the question that they're having is, should all of my weights be equal? And really what they're talking about is relative to certain areas of the body. Should the weights that they're using for like a squat and a deadlift be equal? Should the weights that they're using for a leg extension and leg curl be equal? Should the weights that they're using for, hip ab and adduction be equal? Should the weights that they're using for a chest press and a row be equal? Okay. And maybe you've wondered this as well, because there's a lot of ideas out there that, like your quads and hamstrings should be the same strength or everything like that. But the truth of the matter is these over generalized concepts of like, these groups of muscles should be the same strength and things along those lines, they leave a lot of nuance out of the equation. And because of that, those guidelines end up being misinformation. So today we want to kind of look at this question head on and answer it for you once and for all.
That's right. I think it's pretty common to feel like, well, I should have balance, right? So should like my knee extension and my knee flexors, have a similar weight? That was a specific question I actually got this morning from one of my clients. And it's really interesting because even though we do want to feel like, okay, our muscles are balanced, that doesn't always necessarily mean that you're doing all the same weights. So when it comes to different exercises throughout your gym, even if it's the same muscle groups, your weights will have variation. There's going to be differences in weights, whether you're doing a certain machine rows or dumbbell rows, or you're doing a squat or a deadlift. So even similar muscle groups, but it even goes to a knee flexion, a knee extension. You're going to notice that your weights are different. Or another one I got today was hip abduction and hip adduction. Should those weights be the same? You're going to notice that if you do them and don't think about it, your weights will be different, but that is how it is on everyone because of, first of all, how machines and weights are designed, and then second of all, with how your muscles and your joints are structured.
Exactly. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind with this is different machines are built differently. And I'm not even talking about brands of machines, but even if you take, like a common line of equipment is called Cybex, all right? And so, a Cybex leg extension versus a Cybex leg curl, all right? Those are built differently. And because they are built differently, one of the things that changes with them is where during the range of motion, the weight is easier for you to lift and where it is more difficult for you to lift. And because that's going to be different from one machine to the next, the actual challenge to your body when using those machines is going to be different, with when using one machine versus the next. And then you go from, one brand of exercise equipment to another brand of exercise equipment. It's a completely different challenge to your body. So even if you're like, I do the leg extension with a Cybex and then I go to, a Nautilus and I do a leg extension, it's like those weights likely aren't going to be the same either if you're actually challenging yourself to the same degree because the machines are built differently. But more than that, there's also a certain mechanics about, outside of machines of using free weights, all right? And again, where during the range of motion, the weight is going to be more difficult versus where it's going to be easier if you're using dumbbells or barbells or if you're using cables, things like that, based on how you're doing the exercise. And then layered on top of that, like you were saying, Julie, is the structure of your joints and how your muscles are able to produce force or have strength throughout the ranges of motion. So there is the challenge of the exercise itself, and then there is the opportunity that your body has to create strength while doing an exercise or throughout a range of motion. And those are going to be different with every single movement, with every single machine, with every single exercise. And so because of that, it's quite frankly like unreasonable to think that, okay, well, my weights are going to be the same from one exercise to the next, or, my deadlift should be, this much relative to my squats or anything like that. They are going to be different. There's going to be differences between people. And so what the big thing that you need to understand is with every exercise that you're doing, the goal really is just to challenge your body wherever your strength levels are at on that day with whatever exercise you're doing. You just want to make sure that the exercise is challenging.
That's right. So when we're thinking about, okay, well, the whole reason we got to this question is like, I should work my body evenly and keep everything balanced, is it really boils down to how difficult was the exercise for that area or for that muscle group, right? So if we're thinking like quads and hams and we're thinking, oh, well, those should be kind of balanced. But I know that when I choose the weight on the weight stack, it's going to be different for many reasons, not like the muscle structure, the way the joints are functioning, the way the machine is giving your body the resistance. We need to feel like, hey, if I'm working at a 8 out of 10 like challenge on the knee extension or knee straightening or working my quads at 8 out of 10, then when you go over to the hamstrings, if everything is healthy and functioning well, then do 8 out of 10 on the backside, right? So we're thinking more about perceived challenge and effort rather than the actual weight, because the weight or the resistance varies again from muscle group to muscle group, from weights to machines. But what we do know is that our body responds to difficulty, right? And so no matter what the numbers are saying, we're still looking for how intense was this. We can also get a little pickier about, okay, I did it at this intensity this many times, right? I did 3 sets of that at 8 out of 10 intensity. Or I got to 8 out of 10 intensity in 1 minute, and at 1 minute, I was all done. Or I did it in 30 seconds, and I was all done. So you can get more specific with the intensity, but again, it will always boil down to, we're going to maintain balance by challenging all the areas of your body, but doing it relative to we call it perceived exertion. Like how difficult did that seem to you? How tough was that versus what the actual weight was?
Exactly. All right. So that's one way of interpreting the question that's been asked is like, should your weights be the same between different exercises and everything like that? But another interpretation of that question is, should your weights be the same between you're doing the exercise with your right side versus you're doing the exercise with your left side? So if you are doing a knee extension and you do it, just with your right leg versus just with your left leg, should your weights be the same with that? If you are doing a chest press, should it be the same if you're doing it with your right arm versus your left arm? And the answer to this is different, because with the answer to this question is, ideally, those weights should be the same. Yes, they should, in an ideal scenario. But for most people, they're not. For most people, there are differences between the strength output with the right side of the body and the strength output with the left side of the body. And not only are there objective differences, but oftentimes people are able to feel and perceive those differences as well. And that can be due to a number of things. It might be, your dominant side, and so you're just used to using that side more, or, you have specific injuries on one side versus the other, or just your general usage of one side versus the other, throughout your day. Every time you walk up the stairs, you always, lead with your left leg or something like that. And so these strength differences start to build up and accumulate over time, and they can become very noticeable when you start to do exercises with one side of your body versus the other.
That's right. So when you first start exercising, let's say you're brand new to this thing and you're like, wow, like I do like a lateral raise with the dumbbells, and my right is just like, I can rep it out. I can do 8 pounds. But on your left, you're like, oh my gosh, this thing, I'm struggling. It's hard. I can barely lift it up. I'm kind of having so the whole thing, right? You're noticing a strength difference side to side. And this is, again, what Charlie was saying, this is really common to notice around your body, especially as you start doing like full body workouts. You're like, wow, rowing is fine, lateral raising, not so fine, like a big difference. Or twisting one way or twisting the other way, there's a strength difference. This one, we do eventually want to see that it becomes even. Although, in your workouts, when you start to notice it, sometimes it's not the best time to go ahead and intervene. It's a good observation time, but it's not the best time to intervene. So, unlike the previous way where should all of my lifts be of similar weight or muscle groups be of similar weight, when we think side to side, should my right feel like my left? Should my right strength be similar to my left? Eventually, we do want to get to this place. In fact, this is a big red sign, a red flag for, hey, you might need some muscle activation techniques or some changes in how your body's functioning in terms of functionality. If we're seeing the imbalance side to side.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually one of the clear indicators that, hey, like MAT would be extremely valuable for you. If you're noticing that, your strength on one side is different than your strength on the other side, or when you do an exercise, let's say, again, you're doing a leg extension, you're like, wow, I just feel like I'm lifting it with my left leg. I feel like my right leg's just going along for the ride. Or like you gave the example of the lateral raise, it feels like, okay, my left arm, I can really lift it, my right arm, not so much, all right? These are indications, even if there isn't pain, even if there isn't tightness, even if there isn't any other symptoms going on, that's an indication that there is some kind of dysfunction in the communication with the muscles, which is leading to a decrease in the strength of the muscles, at least on that one side, if not on both sides. And so this is where MAT can really step in and start to assess your body more objectively and say, okay, these are the things that you're perceiving, that you're feeling. Let's really see and kind of dial in where you're having these dysfunctions, where you are having these issues with muscle contraction, these issues with communication between your brain, your nervous system, and your muscles. And through that MAT process, not only can those areas be identified, but they can be addressed as well. And the areas that are lagging behind can be brought back up to speed. And so for us, like MAT is such a valuable part of the, hey, kind of getting my body balanced equation because of this ability to kind of step in and say, all right, these are the things that you're perceiving, these are the things that you're feeling, these are the imbalances that you're picking up on when you're working out, but let's really kind of take the subjective out of the equation and really start to look at things objectively and say, okay, this side's not moving as well, this side isn't contracting as well, and then start to address those issues directly.
Now, Charlie, what we find when we start seeing these imbalances and we get people on the MAT table is that the gap of the strength difference, right? Like the difference in the sides starts to decrease, or at least we want to see that it's starting to decrease. But not only does the MAT start to help the function of the less functional side, but it also will allow your workouts to then become more effective, right? So because your nervous system will be talking to your muscles better, that connection is sharper, is more effective. We'll also notice that your strength will start to increase more when you're exercising because you're not trying to build strength and build conditioning on top of dysfunction, right? So we're trying to lessen that dysfunction, increase the communication so that when you're exercising, you're not noticing as many differences. But over time, you're going to also notice that the exercise will have a positive conditioning effect on that weaker side. So over time, again, we want to see that those strength differences side to side start to decrease. And this is actually a really great way to find out where your dysfunctions are before they become symptomatic. Like if you're like, I'm a pretty asymptomatic person, I mean, things pop up time to time, but then you go and exercise and you're like, dang, every time I do, my push-ups, my left shoulder feels hunky, my right feels just fine. Or every time I do my side bend, this bend feels great and this one. That's great information to give to your MAT practitioner because they're going to know immediately, oh, okay, so something that was, it hasn't gotten to the stage of symptomatic yet, meaning it's not giving you back pain or it's not giving you shoulder pain yet. But we know that when it's challenged, there's a difference in the abilities of the side. And that can lead us to look, hey, let's look at those side benders. Let's look at those shoulder pressers. And so it will help us figure out where should we start looking for this muscle dysfunction, this lack of communication, so that we can avoid it getting symptomatic, but also allow your exercise to do its thing even better.
Exactly. Now, another indicator that MAT would be really useful for you along these same lines is you feel like one side of your body is progressing faster or more than the other side. So like, let's say you're doing a leg press and you're just feeling kind of one of your legs not only just working more while you're doing it, but also feeling like that side is getting stronger while the other leg is lagging behind. Not only is it not as involved in the exercise, but you feel like, over the last few months, like it's just not making the gains in strength. That can be an indication that even though you are loading it the same as the other side, the communication aspect between, again, the brain, the nervous system, and your muscles isn't there. And so that's where MAT can come in and say, okay, well, we need to reestablish that communication. So when you go to work out, now all of a sudden, all the muscles that are there are viable options for your body to use. And when you're loading them, when you're challenging them, you can start to see them progress like the other side is. And in addition to muscle activation techniques, another thing that can be really beneficial to add into your workouts are more like unilateral or single-sided exercises. So instead of just doing, leg extension where you're using both legs at the same time, do some sets where you're just using your left leg, some sets where you're just using your right leg, okay? Or, instead of doing a chest press where you're using both arms at the same time with a barbell or something, grab a dumbbell and, do it where you're just using your right arm, just using your left arm, or just do dumbbells in general. And so each arm has to work independently. But doing these kind of unilateral exercises in addition to MAT can help to start to even out those strength imbalances that you may be perceiving. Here's the word of caution though, is if you just jump to doing the unilateral exercises without getting the MAT, the chances that you kind of even out your strength are much lower, because what your body ends up doing is it just compensates around the dysfunction that is already there. So the value of MAT is it helps clear out that dysfunction. So when you go and do the exercises, now you have a full set of muscles, so to speak, that you're able to work with, versus if you don't clear out that dysfunction, well, you are trying to lift the weight with just the one side that is dysfunctional, but you are not able to get as much out of that exercise because of that dysfunction that's already going on. So you get the dysfunction cleared out with MAT, and then you can start to load it either unilaterally doing one side at a time or bilaterally using both sides at the same time. But that will help to then build up the strength from there.
That's right. It's kind of like a few years ago, I noticed like my car, well, I was driving my car and it was like pulling to the right, so like every time I would let go of the wheel or just like lighten my touch on the wheel, I'd be like merging into the next lane, which obviously wasn't good. So I figured out quickly how to compensate for that, which is hold my steering wheel a little bit to the left, right? So there was a dysfunction in my car, meaning my car was pulling to the right. I figured out a compensation, pull it to the left. So what's so bad about just holding my steering wheel, so that I could go straight? And I could keep driving miles and miles and miles and miles like that. When I took my car in, he's like, thank goodness you brought this thing in, because the wear and tear that it's putting on your car, having to use this compensation over and over again, you almost popped your tire up here. And I was like, what? That's crazy. So I didn't even realize it. But that's what happens a lot of times in our body, is that our bodies learn how to compensate. That's like what they're designed to do, is to keep you going. And that is called compensation. And the more and more that we train and train and train on top of compensation, that can really create a lot of wear and tear in the body, but it can also kind of reinforce the dysfunction that's going on. So when you take a pause and get MAT, or don't take a pause and just add in MAT, you're going to start getting more efficient movement, and also, like what Charlie's saying, kind of clear out that compensation and get you more to how ideally the muscles should be firing. And this will help not only you build up that strength and build up that balance again, it'll also be really nice for your joints. One of the biggest reasons why people get joint pain in the end is because of muscle dysfunction. So we want you to be getting MAT to work on that dysfunction, and then you can also add in the single-sided exercise specifically so that the strong side isn't compensating for the left side, or lifting for, I just said the left side like it's the standard weaker side. Anyways, we want to see that you're doing single-sided exercises so that the strong side isn't lifting for the weak side. A lot of machines and bars and things, you'll notice that because it's like a singular unit, like for example, think of a knee extension. Both legs are pressing out on one bar. So if one side's stronger and one side's weaker, then the strong side can kind of just take over. The idea of the single-sided exercise is like, great, now each side will have to do its work, right? It's not like one side can protect or overwork for the other side. So play with those, but again, like Charlie said, use that with caution, because it is possible that if you are having a lot of dysfunction, that dysfunction really should just get cleared out so that you're functioning a lot more optimally.
Right on. So should all of your weights be equal? Well, the bottom line is between different exercises, no, they're not going to be equal, nor should you strive to have them be equal. But between the right side and left side of your body, yes, that would be an ideal scenario. But here's the thing, just trying to hammer it home by continuing to do exercise, if you are noticing that there's a difference between your right side and left side of your body, can ultimately be overlooking a lot of dysfunction that's within your system that is creating those imbalances between the right side and left side of your body. Muscle activation techniques is a process that objectively identifies where the dysfunction is within your neuromuscular system and then addresses that function directly. So then when you go and do your exercises, not only has that dysfunction cleared out, but you have a body that is more ready, more available to do the exercise and get more from the workouts that you're doing. So if you'd like to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself, that is our specialty here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. All you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, you'll find a big green button that says Get Started. You can click that, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. And if you'd like our guidance with your workouts, strength training workouts that you can do from home in under 20 minutes using minimal equipment, it's exactly what we teach you to do within the Exercise for Life membership. Right now, you can get your first 30 days to the membership for free by going to www.exerciseforlifestudios.com. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is talking about differences in how the strength feels on one side of the body versus other, either when they work out or throughout their day? Share this episode with them so they can understand different steps that they can start taking to even out what they are experiencing as those strength imbalances and start to clear out any dysfunction that's within their system. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us and leave us a rating and review. Not only does it help people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise, it also helps them find our podcast when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.